get the slides. There's a link right there to click and get the slides. And there's the prompt on my page for the recording. Thank you. So that's available. If you're listening by phone, pressing *6 to unmute your line, or *9 on the phone to raise your hand in the webinar. So even if you're just on the phone, you can still raise your hand in the webinar, and that will give us your phone number. And if I don't know the name, I'll read out the last 3 or 4 digits, and you can go ahead then. You can opt to receive or see closed captioning, and there's a link right there. Meeting information, we have a page where that is posted right now. So it's right there on the lower right-hand corner of the screen, the ARPA webinars webpage. And next slide, please. Thank you. So again, we're recording the meeting. Please be aware and conscious of the choices you're making about what you're sharing, and just make that a conscious choice on your part. We are not going to be stopping someone when they're giving protected health information, knowing that they're choosing to do that the meeting is being recorded. So thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, we are going to have a specified amount of time for questions, ideas after each rule topic. Generally, the pages that have green font on them are the pages, or slides, if you will, where we're going to be stopping and asking for comments. We're going to have a certain amount of time, which means we're going to run out of time at some point. We're going to come to the end of that. And even though there may be more people in the queue, we're going to have to move forward. But please know that we will have options for people to give comments and questions, whether it be the chat, whether it be a follow-up email inbox. That will be explained by policy staff. And so this is slightly different. We did this last minute change, so I beg your pardon that I think the words on the page are a little bit different from what we're doing. We are not taking people into the queue through the chat. We're doing that again through raising your hand in the webinar or giving me your name when I ask you to unmute your phone. So next slide, please. Okay. So given that it's such a large group, we are going to have up to 2 minutes for your comment or question, and I'm keeping time. We are also, by the way, are keeping time on staff responses so that we're not also, inadvertently monopolizing the time. There's a large group of people today. If it's anything like last time, which was 140, I believe, we are going to be adding all ideas to listening logs. There are 2 of them. One is things for further discussion which belong to other meetings elsewhere, and the other is pertaining specifically to these draft rules. If we run out of time for all comments, again, please place your question or ideas in the chat. We will add it and add everything to the listening log, the appropriate one. We have 2 of them again. Comments unrelated, as I said before, will be added to the issues for further discussion. Thank you. Next slide, please. So what are we doing today? Today, we are going to be doing introductions of, I believe, the vendor and the staff who are with us today. And we're going to be going over rules and regulation changes for case management redesign, goals for the rule updates, and roles and responsibilities within that. We're going to have a presentation of HCBS Waiver Program eligibility. That's going to go for about an hour and 30 minutes. And then a 15-minute wrap up at the end. So again, to get your name into the queue, it's raising your hand in the webinar. And what you can do is go to the reactions button on the bottom, and if you click it, it'll give you the place where you can raise your hand. If you change your mind, you can also lower your hand. So with that, I will move it over to the policy staff. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. I appreciate all of the information to kick off the meeting and the groundwork, ground rules. And I appreciate all of you joining this morning. As John said, this is a very large effort that, we're working really hard to make sure that we are able to create the space to get all of the input and insights and really garner the feedback from all of you and the various perspectives that all of you bring to the table. Before we jump in, though, I just feel like, especially with Thanksgiving, I know I have a heavy heart and many of you have a heavy heart on what happened down in Colorado Springs. And I just want you all to hear the department is with you and your family and friends and all of our community members who were negatively impacted by this, and just want to create that space for you all to just take a moment and pause and reflect and think of those members, our community members down in Colorado Springs. All right, so with that, jumping back to the purpose of today's meeting, we just really want to share that our goal is really to get the feedback, but not dig into the policy and the components, and that the team really wants to make sure that we have a space for hearing guiding principles necessary for you and your the perspective that you bring. And that this isn't going to be a place where we delve into those policy decisions, but when John said there is that place where we may pull certain topics out and have further conversation. There's also current work that's underway where we have very robust stakeholder engagement happening and want to make sure that we respect those processes as well and the work that's underway there. And so if we go to the next slide, our goal is really to make sure that the rules reflect the operations and guidance for our programs and our contracts. When we're looking at case management redesign, everywhere in our rules, it will reference single entry points or community center boards or private case management agencies. And we really need to bring that into alignment with what will be expected of case management agencies going forward after case management redesign. And so for us, this means that we needed to step back and open up all of our rules so that, when we were working with our team to really figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? Because this is a really large effort. And talking with, it's not just case management, but it's also our benefits team. And so the team proposed a really good process and approach and got stakeholder input and feedback. And then Bonnie and Colin and I really support that effort so that we can use this time to recognize that throughout our rules, they're kind of hodgepodge and spread and a little bit clunky. And so this is really a chance for us to clean that up. And so that it really is more cohesive and clean and it reads better for all of us. Right now, case management, as I mentioned, is just scattered everywhere. And so wholeheartedly, we just want to make sure that we create a framework and structure going forward that makes the most sense. Before the team jumps into this, I also just want to share, as I mentioned, there are other work groups and work streams that are underway doing a lot of work. And so it's important for you all to hear us. Just because we're doing this rule process doesn't mean we're going to stop that other work. There's important areas where it makes sense to do rule revisions outside of this process. So currently, for example, there's a lot of work underway on our program side as it relates to the new level of care and assessment that we've been working on, as well as SIS rule revisions. And so those work groups will continue on and those rules will come forward outside of this process. Similarly to, 2 weeks ago, we released an informational memo around overcost containment. So the team is working on those rules to align with that informational memo, and that will happen outside of this process. And we'll continue to work on that through the respective stakeholder engagement efforts. So with that, again, appreciate all of your time today. And Tiffany, I will turn it over to you to dig in.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. If we can go to the next slide. So just a review of our current rule structure is really fragmented. Pieces of applicable rules, like Amanda said, all over the place. So next slide, please. So we have created a new rule structure or are proposing a new rule structure. As it flows, our thought is to start with eligibility, going to case management requirements, CCB requirements, and then service definitions and provider requirements. So Today, we are going to be talking about the waiver and program overall requirements. Next slide, please. So our goals for these updates are really to minimize the duplication within the rules and help everyone involved understand their roles and responsibilities, from case manager to provider to member and services and family member. We want to make that those rules clear and accurate in our rules. And then we want a rule structure that is easy to follow and easy to understand. So you can know where to go to find the information that you need for any particular program. Next slide, please. We have kind of 3 sections of folks working on these rules. So our roles are defined here. So I'm Tiffany. I'm the Case Management Redesign Policy Advisor. And I have my teammates, Nicolette and John Barry here helping facilitate. We also have subject matter experts who will be addressing any imminent questions or concerns about kind of thought processes for changes, and then answering questions on the back end if there are things that come up that we need more support with. And then we have our contractor HCBS Strategies. Steve and Andrew are here with us. Most of you know them from their long history of working with Colorado and HCBS. And they're really working on keeping those listening logs and issues for further discussion updated, making sure that we are following through and following up on anything that has been brought up. And then really assisting with the back end writing of this massive document, these massive rules that we are opening. So those are our roles. As for you, we just want your feedback here. So we can go to the next slide. These are, we can put the links in the chat for where you can find these listening logs. We have, as has been mentioned, the listening logs and the issues for further discussion log. Both of those are posted live to our website, and you can see those updated as we go today. We will also kind of pause as things get added and show you where that has been added and make sure that that's been accurate. So I think with that, we will go to the actual rules, which is why everyone is here today.
I'm just going to share my screen to get that going. So 1 second. I'm Nicolette, by the way.
You need me to share it, Nicolette? Oh, you got it. Great. You are on mute, Nicolette.
Sorry about that. Okay, can everybody see it well? Is it, no?
No, it's not shared anymore.
Yes, don't. Sorry, you guys. There we have it. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes, thank you.
You need to increase it a little bit.
Sure.
It doesn't look fine for the screen.
Okay. Me-
If you want, I can share it. I have a Adobe Acrobat, so it's more readable.
That I am.
Nicolette, you should be able to just push the button at the very top, the 100%, and just make it more.
Yes. That is my. There we go. Got it. Sorry, I had to move around some bars that were in the way of my share. Is that working okay? Can everybody see that all right?
It's better.
Okay. So what we're going to get started with before we start going into the rules, I'm not going to be reading everything in black because that is stuff that has just not changed and it's still here. So what I am going to be going through is you'll see for anybody who cannot see in color, we have lots of little symbols around. So if you see either blue or the slashes around any of the words, that is something that is a major rule revision, that's different language, that's new, completely put in and revised. You're not really going to see that in any, I don't think it's in any of this, the waiver rule programs, because really this one is more going to be, you'll see a lot of this green. And green or those little things are called the little brackets. So if you see these brackets or the green, that means that we've basically just taken, and our subject matter experts, I should say, have taken language that they've seen kind of scattered throughout other areas, and they've moved it, or it's very similar language. It's not a lot of changes, it's just, we feel like we don't want the same rules in different areas or, duplications. So we feel like we've put it here. And when we go through this, I'm going to read page by page of whatever isn't changed. And we'll stop and pause after each page and ask, does that make sense to you? Do you think that it also belongs here? Do you have any questions? And we have subject matter experts here to answer. If you see anything red with the slash through it, these are the brackets, sorry, these in green or the combined moved, these are braces. These guys are brackets. And if you see that a line through any of them, that means it's an outdated reference and it's to be removed. If you see just the brackets or red, it's also an outdated reference that we feel like should be updated. And again, we would really welcome your feedback. So with that, there's nothing new on this page to read. Does anybody have any questions about that structure that I'm going to go through?
We will take names for the queue at this point. Again, raising your hand in the webinar or at this moment, unmuting your computer or phone and giving me your name only. Anyone?
All right. With that, I think maybe we can get started. Do you have something, Tiffany, to
I
add?
just wanted to make a comment. These first several pages are the definitions. These first 3 pages are definitions from the final settings rule definitions. Many of you were involved in those, that rule development, and that's what these first few pages are. Like Amanda said, that was a process outside of this, so we're not going to get into the details of that right now. But if you do have comments or questions about these particular pieces, please put that in the chat. We'll make sure that that team addresses it. We really want to get to the meat and potatoes of today, which is the waiver eligibility.
Thank you for that. Okay, so the first section of green that you'll see, it's really just a very simple one. General definitions regarding client eligibility section, just moved here. So then we are going to move through the first piece that we see I mean, when you see these red, this is basically just us saying right here, this is where we got this from. And then we have one here that it's one of the state's HCBS waiver. So client means an individual who has met long-term services and supports eligibility requirements and has often offered and agreed to receive home and community-based services in, and then we're adding one of the state's HCBS waiver programs. Let me make sure that I have it. And that is it for that page. Everything good there so far? All right.
If we
Nicolette,
have any comments, I see one person raising their hand. Anyone else or anyone want to unmute and give me your name for the queue at this moment? Okay, Mona, please go ahead.
yeah. So Nicolette, I do have one question on the case management agency there. It's first of all, how much authority will the state have to manage private case management agencies if they're chosen? And will the process be part of this RFP?
I think those also, so those are questions that we can put into our issues for further discussion. Since we're not really getting into like all of those types of details or policy changes, these are more just, it's an area that we were able to reference from a section to put into the rule. So really that's all that that part is saying. But does anybody else have a different answer from our team, or is that good to put in there?
Yeah, I think Mona, if that's okay, was that Mona that said that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I think we'll put that in our listening log and make sure that that gets addressed in future rule meetings, or we have a separate process for explaining that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what was the second program? You were asking about private case management agencies, and I was asking if another program was part of it.
The PASAs.
PASA?
PASA.
The PASAs.
Okay, thank you. I think we can move forward. Christy Brodden, please go ahead.
Great, thank you, John. And I saw somebody else asked a similar question in the chat, but it looks like these proposed rules are referencing other rules that, in my mind, need to change as a result of this process too. So, for example, definitions at 8.390. I mean, that whole section. And so I guess my question is the intent to then strike those other definitions from those other places? It seems like we're creating more definitions and maintaining some references back to existing definitions. And so is the department looking at the 8.39, 8.400 to consolidate all of those too? Because it looks like we're maybe making it worse.
Christy, let me just try to answer your question. I think what you're asking, and I think what Amanda asked is, you're seeing the 8.500.1 in parentheses, 8.500 or 8.600.4. You're seeing all of that in parentheses. That is a reference for people to know where this came from. We didn't just pull this out of nowhere.
Right. So what I'm saying is, so corrective action plan shall be as defined in section 8.390.1.d.
Yes.
So I guess I'm not understanding then. So we're going to refer to other ones. So what's happening to section 8.390?
It will all be moved into the new rule structure. And so all of those references then will be changed to the new references.
Okay. And is the department trying to make sure that we are only defining things in one place and then referring back to that single definition, because we still have, for example, HCBS waiver services defined in multiple places.
Yes. To answer the beginning of that question, yes, we are working to have definitions in one place and refer back to them. Does that answer your question?
Sorry, my internet cut out just as you were answering that last part.
That's okay. Yes, we are working to define them in one place and reference back to them throughout the rest of the rules.
Okay, so I think what would be helpful is to make some note of, so that we're not asking these types of questions, that, hey, we know that HCBS waiver services is defined here, here, and here, and these places are going to be stricken. And we're going to keep it here, and there will be one definition, and everything else will refer back to this.
Sure.
Because that's part of what I've had to spend some of my time on is, oh, are they aware that there are these definitions over here?
Yes.
Because that's part of what we spend our administrative time on, is in trying to make sure we're following rules.
Sure.
So if we could get a more comprehensive map of what is happening.
Yep. No problem, Christy. We will work on that for you guys.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I have
John
one
again.
question in the chat. Kyle asked, under the case management agency definition, can you expand on what the provider participation agreement is? Is this the contract? And yes, this is the contract. So I think we'll
Hey,
keep moving.
anyone Okay, we'll move forward. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. I appreciate everybody's questions, interactions, and feedback. Okay. All right, and for this one, again, it's just another one showing where we received the reference from. Nothing to get into still, no changes. More areas, early and periodic screening, kind of which section we took that from. Again, the rights and suspension accordance, where we took that from. All of those, again, just to let people know, yeah, we don't plan to have it in all of these different areas. We're saying we think that these things should be referenced and brought here. Okay, so now we get into inability for independent ambulation means the individual does not walk and requires the use of a wheelchair or scooter in all settings, whether or not they can operate the wheelchair or scooter safely on their own, or 2, the individual does walk but requires the use of a walker or cane in all settings, whether or not they can use the walker or cane safely on their own, or 3, the individual does walk but requires touch or standby assistance to ambulate safely in all settings. And this we got from the CIH waiver, and it was in effect 7/1/22, further detailed in the CIH targeted population eligibility. Since we had that there, we felt that it belonged here in these waiver program eligibility rules. And let me see if there's any other green on this to read before I take questions. That is it for page 9. Are there any questions?
Okay, thanks, folks. If anyone wants to ask a question or comment verbally, you can unmute your audio at this point. *6. Do we have some stuff in the chat? Anybody? For verbal comment? Hearing none. Mona? I'm sorry, I should have turned it over to you, Tiffany or Nicolette.
That's
Apologies.
okay. So the question in the chat from Mona is the provider agency definition on page 10. Does that refer to the exception for rural areas? We are not quite to page 10 yet. So I'm going to hold that question until we get there, Mona. Next question is under the deinstitutionalized definition, only EBD is referenced. Will this be updated as there are other deinstitutionalization needs going into other waivers such as DD, SLS, etc.? Great question. I don't have the answer to that. I don't know if we have any SMEs that want to speak to that, but we will put that in the log.
If anyone at this moment wants to unmute their audio and give me their name to make a verbal comment, take names right now. Anyone? Or again, you can press *9 on your phone to raise your hand in the webinar. Hearing none, Tiffany?
Great.
John, you have more questions, more comments and questions in the chat.
Yep, I'm working on it, Jose. Hold on. Sorry, I was just reading them first. Then Shauna asked, shouldn't it say in any setting instead of all settings? We can take that back to the team. So if we can log that in our listening log. And then Jen McIntyre asked about the definition of delay is currently different in the 8.600 and then clarified with 25% delay and 8.500 rules. Will this be clarified and updated in the new rules? Great question. We will log that question and take that back to the teams.
Okay, one more time from John Barry here. Any names for the queue? Unmute your audio to give me your name at this moment, or press *9 on your phone. Thank you. Again, hearing none for right now. Tiffany?
One more question in the chat from Christy Broughton. Are there differences in the definition for DD or IDD? So Steve, if we can go ahead and log that in the questions.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, let's keep moving then, Nicolette.
Right. All great questions. I just want to say this is why we are doing this, and I'm super excited that everybody is raising these questions for all of us to really deep dive and make sure these are right. Okay, so now we have a life-limiting illness means a medical condition that, in the opinion of the medical specialist involved, has prognosis of death that is highly probable before the child reaches adulthood. Conditions that are incurable, irreversible, and that usually result in death are considered as one criterion for the eligibility for the HCBS CLLI waiver. And that has been put here again, because we think that this is a good section for where it should stay or belong. Or it could have been just a slight, like it's the same language, basically, maybe very minor changes. And then we do have some red brackets here showing that we received this from section 8.604.3. That is it for this page. What are we on? 10. Okay, so I think we knew that Mona had questions. Any other questions?
So we have someone raised their hand in the webinar. We have some comments in the chat. Let me just ask if anyone else wants to unmute their audio and give me their name, and we're going to get to everybody. Anyone? You can raise your hand in the webinar with your phone. Unmute *6, give me your name. Okay, let's start with the raised hands. Jose, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, John. Actually, I want to raise a question that Julie is asking as well. We know that in several different waivers right now, we have different ages that define adulthood and childhood. You know, the difference between adulthood and childhood. Are we going to standardize those in all waivers, especially since some of these waivers are being not joined, but being assessed by the same tool now?
Jose, oh, sorry, this is
Sorry.
Sarah.
No, and
My
are
apologies.
we going to standardize those, or is it going to stay the same?
Sorry, this is Sarah. So for the life-limiting illness, since that's specifically for the CLLI waiver, it might make sense, and I agree with you, on instead of reaches adulthood, reaches you know, to the age of 19, because that is the specific target group for that waiver. Would that make better sense than what we have right now?
Yeah, I think so, because if you say adulthood, that might, even though you're talking about the specific waiver, that might indicate that you're talking about a universal adulthood age.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that comment.
And then going back to Mona's comment, the provider agency definition on page 10, does that refer to the exception for rural areas? I don't believe that it does, but I think that's a good comment for us to come back to and look at that definition. So thank you. We'll put that in our log and look into it.
Did you have anything to add to that, Sarah? I saw you came off of mute.
I didn't, I accidentally did, my apologies.
Okay.
Okay. We have a couple more comments in the chat. Amanda asked, this sounds like it's only one condition for the life-limiting illness, but could a combination of illnesses creating the same prognosis count? Sarah, do you want to answer that question?
Yes, it could be several different conditions. Would that be, should we add that to make that clearer, I guess?
We could add language of means a medical condition or set of medical conditions that.
Right.
Sure. Yep. Thanks, Amanda. Kyle asked under professional medical information, under professional medical information page definition, is this a requirement for CSR and initial certification, or will the rule reflect the PMIP only being needed to certify intake and eligibility? The rule should reflect that it's only needed for intake and eligibility. So if it doesn't, then we will make a note in the listening log to make that update. Thank you, Kyle.
That is great. We just changed that. So excellent comment.
Yeah.
Thanks. This is John again. Do we have anyone who wants to give a comment or question verbally? You can unmute your phone, press *6. You can raise your hand in the webinar.
And John, to my previous question, Julie also says in the chat that they are removing the 19 and the ACA uses 26. So do we need to leave 19 for the CLLI, or do we want to use the new standard 26 or 21?
I think what Sarah was saying, Jose, is that that they will update the definitions by the age group rather than calling it adulthood.
No, I get that, but Julie saying that they are removing the 19. I wasn't aware of this. And ACA uses 26.
I was not aware of that either.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. And thank you, Jose, for bringing that up.
Yeah, and the ACA is using 26 for being able to continue to use your parents' insurance and stuff like that. So that may not be as applicable, but clarification if you're considering it 19, 18, or 21, and whether to make it consistent across all waivers. I've got that as a follow-up on the listening log.
Great, thanks, Steve. And then going back to the chat, Kyle asked, will the public safety risk remain a factor when we switch to the person-centered budget algorithm? Will this just be updated and discussed at a later date? Great question. And we'll take that back to the team. Yes, I assume that it will be, that it'll change when we have the person-centered budget algorithm, and that we'll update it at that point. Great questions, great comments. Thank you, everyone. Why don't we keep moving to the next page then?
All right, page 11 just has some section references. Right suspension in accordance with showing that it's from section 8.604.3. Reassessment shall be defined as periodic reevaluation from section 8.509.32.c. That is it for page 11. We have some more to dive into. Are there any questions there?
If anyone wants to give a comment or question verbally, you can unmute your audio, give me your name, please. Or raise your hand in the webinar. Hearing none for now. Tiffany?
Looks like there's a question from Kyle.
Yeah. So Kyle asks, under the referral definition, should the language reflect disability system as opposed to developmental disability system, since referrals are received for all waivers? Great question. We will log that in the listening log and have the team respond. Jen McIntyre asked, will client still be the term used to refer to individuals in or seeking services in the future? Great question. That is some language that we are needing to align across all of our rules. And we've got some folks talking about what language we want to put in there. So good question. Okay, Julie,
Thanks,
your vote
Tiffany.
is to not stop using clients. Got it.
We have Christy raised her hand in the webinar. Christy, go ahead, please.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got a question about the use of the term and definition of rights suspension. Since we've moved to rights modification, and so I recognize it's kind of a policy level question, but where do rights suspensions fit in now that that's not really what we're doing anymore?
Are you asking about where they fit in the rules or where that language will be used?
A little bit about. So under the public safety risk, convicted and non-convicted, it talks about a right suspension in accordance with section 8.604.3. One of the struggles we're having now is our definitions of right suspension and rights modifications do not match.
Mm-hmm.
And so we bounce between and sort of, navigate around what these two different requirements ask of us.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we rectify that?
Yeah, so that is something that will be updated. It should be rights modification. That language will be updated in our final rules. Thanks for that question, Christy. I'll make sure that the team who's working on that addresses it and updates the documents accordingly.
Thank you. This is John again. So folks, just a reminder, we are toggling back and forth between verbal comments and the chat. We're going to get to Julie after we take another comment from the chat, I believe.
So Kyle asked a question about public safety risk. It says parole and probation, but someone can't have parole or probation without being sentenced. And sentencing doesn't occur without a conviction, even if the charges may be dropped after a successful completion of probation. Oh, sorry, that was Amanda, not Kyle. Amanda, we will log your comment. Thank you, and take that back to our team.
Thanks. Julie Riskin, you looks like you lowered your hand, but do you still have a verbal comment?
I put it in the chat. It was on the next
Oh.
green part.
Okay, thank you. Back to the chat, Tiffany, if there's anything.
I think the arc of Arapahoe Douglas is that Carol. Wasn't there a question on page 10 that we were going to address? We did address that question, Carol. The one about provider agency. And then Elsa asked, to Kyle's question, there are several other references to IDD system in the revisions, which may need to be amended if they apply to all CM service users. Thank you for that, Elsa.
Do we have any other verbal comments before we go back to the chat real quick? You can raise your hand in the webinar. You can unmute your phone *6 right now. Anyone? Okay. Oh, there we go. Ben Oaks, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, my question refers to page number 7, the definition of developmental disability. It says anything happened before the age of 22, and I always thought I was developmentally disabled, but I didn't become disabled till 33. So my question is, how do I know what I'm defined as?
Great question, Jen. I think what we agreed earlier is that we would take that definition back to the team and make sure there's clarity and consistency across our rules for those definitions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I see a question from Jose in the chat. Health First Colorado refers to clients as members, does it not? So going back to the conversation about the language of clients and if we'll keep that. So great point, Jose. We'll definitely look at what our other Medicaid rules refer to. And then Julie asks, for spousal, can you clarify to say this is for people not in Medicaid buy-in, as people on buy-in are always a household of one? Also, why is the dual eligible item on number 4 there? I know we provide this, but I'm confused about its placement. Almost looks like one has to be dual, and that is not true. I'm not sure what that second part is referring to.
This is on page, it's on page 13. I was just going to the next part where there was changes.
Gotcha.
John, do we have any other verbal comments or questions about this section? You can unmute your phone, *6, raise your hand in the webinar. Okay, everybody, thank you. Hearing none, seeing none for now. Tiffany?
Last question in the last two comments in the chat. Christy asked, are we going to continue to use the term single entry point agency in addition to case management agency, or these two distinct entities? Great question, Christy. We will take that back to the team who is looking through all of the rules and who is aligning all of the language and definitions. I believe that they are two distinct agencies, and we will be moving towards case management agency. But again, we'll log that and make sure that we get a response. And then Julie's is in Colorado DD also means intellectual disability. There are federal and state definitions. Great. And then Kyle asked, under functional needs assessment, it specifies a face-to-face assessment. Will the initial assessment still be required to be in the applicant's home? Great question, Kyle. I believe the answer is yes, but I am not the expert on those pieces. So we will take that comment back and make sure that you get an answer for it, and that there's clarity in these rules for that. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. So if we can go to page 12, and why don't we do pages 12 and 13 and then pause for comments?
Sounds good. Okay, page 12, 8.485 Home and Community-Based Service Waiver Programs. So under the, we've moved some of these over here. Elderly, blind, disabled is here already. Developmental disability waiver, the HCBS DD waiver. These also will reference the CRSs where we got those. Community mental health and support, persons with brain injury, HCBS BI, supported living services, HCBS SLS, children's habilitation residential program, HCBS CHIRP or CHRP, children with life-limiting illness, HCBS CLI, CLLI, complementary and integrative health, the HCBS CIH, and children's home and community-based services, the children's HCBS waiver, and then children's extensive service, HCBS CES waiver. Those are moved into this section, and now we're going to go to page 13. And then you can see in the brackets where we've got this and general requirements for eligible persons. Has been added in. Individual waiver programs may limit the individual waiver programs enrollment with the utilization of the HCBS waiver program is projected to exceed the spending authority. And then under the financial eligibility, just added in the one where we received this section 8.100. Number 3, spousal impoverishment rules under the 1924 Act are used to determine the eligibility of individuals with a community spouse for the special home and community-based service waiver group. In the case of a participant with a community spouse, the state elects to use spousal post-eligibility rules under the 1924 of the Act. The HCBS waiver programs provide services for individuals who are duly eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid, and applicants / clients, that'll be one of those areas that we're talking about, the language, may be eligible to participate in the adult HCBS waiver program through the Medicaid buy-in program for working adults with disabilities. If all listed eligibility criteria is met, refer to 8.100.6.p. And then the level of care and targeted group. Under that, we have clients are referred to the Case Management Agency, or CMA, for the initial HCBS eligibility determination. The level of care, LOC, you'll hear, eligibility determination screen utilizes the current state prescribed LOC determination screening instrument to determine an individual's need for institutional level of care. So on those pages 12 and 13, we are ready to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Nicolette. John Barry, again, we're going to be toggling back and forth as much as we can between verbal and then comments from the chat. We have 2 people who've raised their hand. We have a bunch of comments. Is there anyone else who would like to make a verbal comment? You can unmute your phone right now. Give me your name. or you can raise your hand again also in the chat. Got 3 people. Okay, tell you what, let's start with the verbal comment with Jen, then we'll go to the chat. Jen, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just have a difficulty with, hang on, let me move this. The wording for under 3, community spouse, do you mean like common law? Because if not, I mean, why not put common law if you mean, I mean, community spouse is very confusing.
Thanks for that comment, Jen. I think it's supposed to reference someone who is a spouse who is not also on a waiver or in a facility, but we can provide some clarity in that language. Thank you for your comment.
Clarity would be good, thanks.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Tiffany. We'll go to the chat and then back to the verbal comments.
So Jen McIntyre asked, will buy-in be available for all adult waivers? If not, it would be helpful to define which ones it is allowable for.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. Hey, Tiffany, it's Sarah. So we have waiver amendments out right now for the DD waiver for all ages. We have the other ones approved. So it should be for all adult waiver programs pending approval from CMS.
Great. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Jose now for a verbal comment question.
Yeah, thank you, John. These 3, 4, and 5 sections, or sections 4, 3, 4, and 5 are kind of confusing. They should be clarified. For example, what Jen brought up, that's important clarification to add. But also in point 4, for example, I think Julie is right when she said earlier that makes it sound like HCBS is an absolute requirement to be dual eligible. Well, where that's either or, right? You can be dual eligible, you cannot, and you can be a single eligible to receive HCBS waiver programs.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're referring to the spousal encouragement rule, in point 5, there should be a clarification that Medicaid buying counts a working adult as a household of 1, no matter what. So the eligibility is applied as a 1 individual, even if the individual has a spouse that earns money and is a community spouse, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sarah, did you want to respond to any of that, or?
Yeah, no, those are great comments, Jose. We took the 3, 4, and 5 specifically from just the waiver application, what they have kind of those check boxes in there, but I can see where we need to be clearer. So thank you.
Okay, let's go back to the chat then, Tiffany.
Let's see. Laura Thomas said that she agreed number 3 is unclear. So thank you for considering rewording it. And then Elsa, it sounds like you want to put yourself in the queue. You've got your hand up.
So let's go to Julie.
Yeah.
Then we'll get to you, Elsa. Thank you. Julie?
My comment is a little further down, so if there's still comments on 3, 4, and 5, maybe they should go first and I'll come back.
Okay, thank you. Elsa, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to just understand the impact of marriage, only because it disproportionately affects people who receive certain benefits, and in some ways you're disincentivized, but you're also incentivized in other ways. So I guess my question is, are these social security rules? Because when I did my research, that was the only place I could find. I went to look for what was a community spouse. because there are a lot of people that I know who are intentionally not getting married because they're worried about how some of these rules apply. So, you know, I kind of like the idea that we have some spousal set aside and some protection, so that one member of a couple can receive HCBS services while the other chooses not to. But I just wonder if this might be one of those issues to set aside, because I really did have trouble just understanding this language. But I also worry that I don't want this to make it harder for people who choose to get married, or to further disincentivize people against getting married. So my question is, where did the language in the rules come from? And maybe if community spouse is a thing, we need to have it added to the definitions. But what's the impact on people who would wish to get married, I guess, is the question.
So 2 questions then, it sounds like, Elsa, is one is what are we referencing when we're saying 1924 of the Act? And 2, what is the impact to people wanting to get married? Is that right?
That's it.
Yeah, so this is Sarah. It is federal statute, and so that is what it's referencing. So the section 1924 of the Social Security Act, and that is the community spouse is the language that the federal definition does use. What the impact of the spousal impoverishment rule is actually beneficial for individuals who are on HCBS and are married to someone who is not on the waiver. That kind of entails that they do not have to get rid of certain assets, or that there's still money for that community spouse that they don't have to spend down in order for their spouse to be on an HCBS waiver. And I know actually Julie and Jose are on the call, and they could probably speak to it a lot more eloquently than I did. So if you would like to jump in or clarify anything that I said, please do so.
Julie, you want to take it?
Sure. Yeah, I put it in the chat. It is very confusing, but if someone's on SSI, that's where they're going to have the biggest problem. SSDI, some problem. But Medicaid, just Medicaid, we actually make it easier. There was a federal law that's kind of always on the verge of not being reauthorized that allows states to do this. Colorado passed a law like more than a decade ago that said we want Colorado to do the maximum, like go as far as the feds will let us go, and that's in our state law. So, so it's really the cash benefits that are the problem. Medicaid, you're actually better off being married on HCBS Medicaid. So I hope that, but again, there's always that's one of the things along with, I think, I can't remember. I know it's been reauthorized fairly recently, but I don't know for how long. It's something that we hear about from time to time, but it is federal and state law. But that does not solve the cash benefit problem for people, which is a good reason to consider buy-in.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Julie. This is John. Just to please let me know when you do have your hand raised. I know it was for some point in the future here in the meeting, so I'm not clear when that would be, and I don't want to pass you up. So
just when we're done. Just when we're done with this, when we get to B.
Oh, okay, very good. So
I think
Tiffany,
you can go ahead, Julie.
Okay. Yeah, I'm super concerned with there's language here that is a significant Olmstead violation and also violates Colorado state law that we passed in, I think, 2002, that says that cost containment in Colorado is aggregate, not individual. We do not bar people from the waivers if we just do a review where they have to, if someone's over the average cost of nursing home care, which might not be their cost of nursing home care, we just do a review to make sure that, those high cost cases are, that all costs are appropriate. But we do not bar people. We have a lot of people living in, not a lot, but there are people whose costs are higher. And and they're people that cannot, even if they wanted to, which they don't, be served in nursing facilities such as long-term vent users, people with very high needs. So I'm extremely concerned about that language, and I'll speak for CCDC that this is a very, very serious concern of ours, and I'd like something in writing sooner rather than later stating that this is going to be addressed and taken out before this goes any further.
Julie, can you specify exactly where you're looking, just so
Absolutely.
we're sure to look at that?
Yeah. So for example, number 9, the cost of HCBS waivers services cannot be more than the cost of placement in a nursing facility, blah, blah, blah. And the client's safety and health can be assured. And it says, and the client's health and safety can be assured in the community within the federally approved capacity and cost containment. We don't have a specific cost containment. So these are the criteria. And I think there was somewhere else where it actually said that someone would be denied entry if they had a certain level of cost. And that's not been our practice for decades. And our state law specifically says we can't do that. And the Department of Justice would absolutely see this as an Olmstead violation, which we're already, which we probably don't need to raise that ire right now. So it's really important that this be very publicly changed very quickly. And there's a few other references, but this is the first. And I think there was something in the black type earlier, but I was just focusing on what you guys all were changing. So you might want to have your people do like a thorough scrub for that. And I think what happened is that we changed our practices, but the rules never changed when we passed the law in 2002.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. So I don't know if you heard Amanda earlier, but we are convening a group about overcost containment and about the cost containment rules. So that will be addressed in a separate process from this particular structure rule process. And yes, we'll be sure that CCDC is involved in that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tiffany, we'll go to the chat if you want.
Can we hang on just a second? So Julie got us into the next page. Elsa, if you have a comment about page 13, we can take that, and then that'll be the last comment and we'll move on.
I believe it's related to the same topic that Julie was raising. I have lost track of the pages. Okay. Somewhere in this section, it talks to the same tool being used to determine someone's eligibility for HCBS, as well as their eligibility for a nursing level of care. Are we at that point, or am I a bit premature?
It's okay. So we had just started on the B1 of level of care and target group that Nicolette has just highlighted. We're going to move on to the next page. I will mention that this does reference the old tool, I believe, or at least the rules from that the current tool that's being used. All of these will be updated with the rules that are being promulgated around the assessment and support plan that is currently being developed.
So I had a very specific question. So is it a change that we use the same tool to determine eligibility for HCBS as well as for institutional level of care, or is that just how it's been done in the past?
So Elsa, you're getting into some policy questions and operations questions. I'm happy to take those down and take them back to the teams and get some answers for you.
Great.
Would that be okay?
That would be great, because I guess my worry is if you use the same tool and someone, as they are evaluated, demonstrates the need for an institutional level of care, will that be a reason for them being ineligible for HCBS?
Okay, thank you for your question.
And I think just for clarity, for the waivers, they have to meet an institutional level of care, either the nursing facility, the ICF, IID, or hospital level of care within that. So that would apply to the waivers. So it would be the same for nursing facility and also for ICF. Right now you're using the ULTC 100.2 and you'll be switching to the new tool. So it's pretty much going to be the same, though there might be some additional targeting or other things you need to meet to be eligible for HCBS.
That's great. Thank you.
Still, I think that's per Julie's comment, this Jose, that's partially wrong for Colorado. Partially. I'm not saying completely. I'm saying,
and I was just meaning in the, like for ICF, you also have to have the DD determination in addition to meeting the nursing facility level of care. And then hospital, it's a little bit different. And then for some of the particular waivers, they also have targeting criteria that you have to be meeting to be eligible for them.
right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
everybody. This is Johnson. Tiffany, just to check in, are we going to go over some more material now or go to the chat?
Yes, let's do a couple more pages of material and then we can pause for questions again.
Okay, are we considered to have gone over this page, or are we still going over it or going to the next, going over?
Yeah, let's go ahead and read through it.
All right. So number 2, the state prescribed instrument measure 6 defined activities of daily living, ADLs, as the need for supervision for behavioral or cognitive dysfunction. ADLs include bathing, dressing, toileting, mobility, transferring, and eating. Number 3, level of care evaluations and reevaluations are performed by case management agencies and utilize the same instrument in determining the level of care for the waivers as for institutional care under the state plan. 4, to qualify for Medicaid long-term care services, the applicant/client must have deficits in 2 of 6 activities of daily living, a 2+ score, or require at least moderate 2+ score in behaviors or memory/cognition under supervision. Retreat from section 8.401.1, guidelines for long-term care services. Number 5, the applicant must also be at risk of placement in a nursing facility, hospital, or intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual disabilities, ICF/IID, within 1 month, but for the availability of waiver services. See individual waiver program for specific level of care requirements. Number 6, for initial level of care eligibility determinations, the professional medical information page, PMIP, is required to be completed by a treating medical professional who verifies the individual's need for institutional level of care. 7, the applicant/client must require long-term services and supports, LTSS, to remain in their own home, in the family residence, or in the community. Number 8, to utilize HCBS waiver benefits, the applicant/client must choose to receive services in their homes or communities. Number 9, and this is the one that we were talking about, we're going to actually be taking back and having the full discussion on. So it's kind of not applicable at this point, but it is the cost of HCBS waiver services cannot be more than the cost of placement in a nursing facility, hospital, ICF/IID, as defined in sections where they would go. And the client's safety and health can be assured in the community within the federally approved capacity and the cost containment of the enrolled waiver program. Number 10, clients who have been determined to meet the level of care and target group criteria shall be certified by a CMA. I guess that's redundant. That's something that we probably should do. Case Management Agency is what that's saying. as eligible for HCBS waiver services. Again, it's kind of a redundancy. The case management agency shall only certify HCBS waiver eligibility for those clients. And then under 10A, determined by the CMA to meet the targeted group definition for one or more waiver programs detailed in the target population criteria section of each HCBS waiver programs in section, and then where those will reference. So here we have under B, determined by a formal level of care assessment to require the level of care availability in a nursing facility, hospital, ICV, IDD, according to sections 8.401.11 through 8.401.15. Refer to specific HCBS waiver programs for level of care required, or a length of stay shall be assigned by a CMA agency for approved admission according to guidelines at sections 8.402.60. Then we get into C. Only clients who receive HCBS services as listed at HCBS waiver services section, and then where that will be. Under number 2, the case management is not a service and shall not be used to satisfy this requirement. The Children's Home and Community-Based Service, the HCBS waiver program, accepted. And then we were doing one more page, correct?
Let's pause. We've got some hands up and a couple of questions in the chat.
Great.
Okay, thank you. This is John Barry. Let's remind folks, if you want to enter your name into the queue at this point, you can raise your hand in the webinar. You can unmute your audio right now, *6, give me your name. Or obviously you can type a comment into the chat. Okay, last time we started with audio, let's start with the chat this time. Tiffany, then we'll go to the audio.
Great. Julie Riskin had a couple of questions. It looks like the second sentence of number 10 does not make sense. So the case management agency shall only certify HCBS waiver eligibility for those clients who are determined by the agency to meet target group. So we can update that language. And then Angela.
It's the second sentence, like the first sentence makes sense, but then the second one is like repetitive or something.
Okay, we can have the team look at that. Angela asked for number 5. The term 1 month is being used. I was under the impression in other areas it references it as 30 days. Is there a reason it is changing to 1 month versus 30 days? Months vary in the number of days. Great call out, Angela. That is a place that we need to make sure we are consistent. So we'll take that back for the policy groups to decide on that language and update you all. And we'll
okay, let's go to the
queue.
verbal comments. I saw Jose there, he's gone now. Jen, please go ahead.
Sorry.
You're still muted.
Oh, am I off now? Okay. I forget where it said that, but it said CMA will see if you're eligible for HCBS services, but isn't it ICPA who determines that?
So I think we have Kidron on here. If you want to come on real quick, Kidron, and talk about the eligibility process at the case management level, or we can take that back and have it answered in our listening log.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Kidron Backus, Case Management Unit Supervisor here. Thanks for that question, Jen. Let me just clarify that I heard you okay. So you're asking, is it the case management agency that determines eligibility for HCBS services, or is it HCPF?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thanks. I just wanted to make sure I heard you right. So HCPF, we use our rules. So what we're doing here today to be able to have the guidelines for case management agencies to use through the determination process. So the case management agencies are the ones that are doing the on-the-ground work through our assessment process to determine whether or not members meet all of the eligibility criteria. As it was mentioned earlier, there's eligibility criteria for long-term care services and HCBS different waiver target criteria that may be applicable. So the case management agencies do that on the ground work based on the rules and definitions that HCPF has set forth. Does that answer your question, Jen?
So it's kind of like CMA does a determination by following HCPF's rules.
Yep, you got it.
Okay, that maybe make that clearer.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for that suggestion, Jen.
Thank you, Jen. So Tiffany, I'm going to do one more verbal comment since we did a couple from the chat before, and after that, we'll try to toggle back and forth. Is that Carol Meredith, the ARC?
It is. Thank you. I can't rename myself on this thing. On number 2, could you scroll down so I can look at that? Yeah, I'm just like a little concerned that you're calling out ADLs and defining those better instead of putting in more information about supervision for behavioral or cognitive dysfunction. I wonder if you refer those back to a definition somewhere, because the need for supervision for behavioral or cognitive dysfunction sort of gets lost in duplicating the ADLs twice.
Great comment. Yeah, I agree. I think we can reference the rules that have to do with the level of care screen. Thanks, Carol.
Tiffany, one from the chat at this point. Is there anything?
Julie, I see your hand and your comment in the chat that E is another problem. E is all the way down on a different page than we're on, so I'm gonna hold on that one. Julie Miller said she had the same comment about number 5. Thank you, Julie. And then Elsa asked if a person has been certified to receive services, but a provider cannot be found and they do not receive a service in 30 days, will they lose the waiver? I believe the answer to that is no, but we will take that back on our listening log, make sure that that question is not only answered, but we are clarifying that in our rules. I do think that we talk about that in our case management rules. So thanks for that call out, Elsa, and we will we'll get to that question. Do we have more
Okay,
in the?
You.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Well, we'll go to Alicia and then back to the chat. Alicia, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I was also looking at number 5, and I know in the chat they've specified business, calendar days, 30 days a month. But I know further up when we had talked about deinstitutionalizations, it was referenced at 45 days. I think maybe I'm confused, or are we wanting to have those be consistent of the 30-day mark?
So your question is about if the deinstitutionalization timeframe is the same for this number 5?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Or at least it's now confused me. So
Sure.
Wanting to clarify that.
Sure. Yep. We will document that comment and get answers to that question. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you.
John, are we
Thank
okay
you.
to go to the chat real quick?
We are.
Okay. Jen McIntyre said throughout the rules, if there could be clarity of business days versus calendar days, that would be really helpful. Thanks for that, Jen. We will make that note, take that back to the teams. We have a couple of seconds on that. Yes, Jen. Julie agreed with Carol. Julie and Pat both agreed with Carol. And then our last one under C2, it says community-based services waiver program accepted. Can you clarify accepted? So this is because, go ahead.
That's okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say this is because the CHCBS waiver has case management as a service currently. That's why it's an exception. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, that's exactly what it was. Thanks, Tiff.
Perfect. All right. I think we'll keep moving. I'm trying to get us through the next few pages before we get to the actual waiver eligibility.
Okay. So for number 3, the desire or need for home health services or Medicaid services that are not identified as HCBS waiver services, the area that's been put in is as listed at waiver services for section XXX shall not satisfy this eligibility requirement. Under D1, the clients who are residents of nursing facilities, hospitals, and then added in, or ICD/IDDs are not eligible for HCBS waiver services while residing in such institutions. So just some clarification add-ins there. A client who is already on, for number 2 under that, client who is already on HCBS waiver recipient, an HCBS waiver recipient, that's the add-in there, and who enters a hospital for treatment may not receive HCBS waiver services while in the hospital. Number 3, a client who is already an HCBS waiver recipient and who enters a nursing facility or ICD/IDD may not receive HCBS waiver services while in the nursing facility. And then under B, there's been a couple of clarifying add-ins. A client receiving HCBS waiver services who enters a nursing facility for respite care as a service under certain HCBS waiver programs identified under section XXX of the waiver services. When we have that, that's what we would put in. Shall not be required to obtain nursing facility ULTC 100.2 and shall be continued as an HCBS waiver client in order to receive the HCBS waiver services of respite care in a nursing facility, with the add-in if respite nursing facility is offered in enrolled HCBS waiver program. Under E, for the cost effectiveness, these are all ones that we're also taking back. So should we read through or just understand that these are all going to be taken back for a new group and pretty much don't really apply at this time?
Yep, the cost effectiveness will be addressed with over cost containment.
Yeah, so these ones we can just kind of know that we're already going to be looking into those, taking them back and having a group to discuss. Under wait lists, persons who are determined eligible for services, the add-in is under an HCBS waiver, who cannot be served within the capacity limits of the federal waiver shall be eligible for placement on the HCBS waiver, is the add-in waivers waiting list. Under number 2, the date used to establish the person's placement on the wait list shall be the date on which eligibility for services under the HCBS waiver, that's the add-in, was initially determined. Under 3A, clients being deinstitutionalized from nursing facilities or ICF slash IDDs. This is the add-in. Clients being discharged from a hospital who, absent waiver services, would be discharged to nursing facility, hospital, or ICF/IDD is the add-in. And clients currently receiving is the add-in, long-term home health benefits who could be at lesser cost to Medicaid. Clients with ULTC 100.2 scores who are at risk for an imminent nursing facility, hospital, or ICF/IDD placement was the add-in. And then right under that, the reference number that was added in here for where we received these is 8.057. And then termination. Are these all still considered? Okay. So a client shall be discontinued from the HCBS service, the HCBS waiver in which enrolled is the add-in when one of the following occurs. Under 1, the client no longer meets criteria set forth in the enrolled HCBS waiver program was the add-in and clarification. The cost of service and supports provided in the community exceed the cost effectiveness exceeds related institutional level of care specifics cost. That was the add-in. And a client shall also be terminated from HCBS waiver if they die, move out of the state, or voluntarily withdraw from the waiver. And the add-in here is refer to HCBS waiver denials and or discontinuations in section XXX, where that will go under case management functions, and then see those sections here, 8.50.9.30.C.1 that one you'll have to get into those. So that is it for those pages. Do we have any questions, understanding that we are, again, going to get into the cost containment as a separate group?
Okay, this is John again. So just as a reminder to everybody, if you want to be entered into the queue to ask a question, you need to raise your hand in the webinar. And it's the icon at the bottom, reactions, and then it will take you to that. Or you can unmute your audio right now and give me your name. We are also taking comments that are typed into the chat. We have 4 people, thank you, have raised your hands in the webinar, and looks like we do have comments. This time, let's start with verbal comments. Alicia, go ahead, please.
I was actually looking under the termination H. I know number 3 has no green on it, but is this something we want to look at changing since we are generalizing everything else to just say HCBS waiver versus they enroll in another HCBS waiver? Does that make sense?
No. Can you try saying it again?
So in everything else, we are generalizing everything to say they are enrolled in an HCBS waiver from HCBS waiver they are which enrolled. Number 3 just says we're going to terminate if they enroll in another HCBS waiver. And it just seems confusing since we are generalizing it, unless I'm just reading into it deeper than I should be.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying that they would be you're questioning the concept of termination if they're just enrolling into another program.
Correct. I understand the long-term stay half of that. It's the first half.
It's the first half. Great. Okay. Yeah, great question.
I was just going to say, this is Sarah. So someone can only be enrolled on one waiver at a time. And so I think that's why that language is in there, because you would have to, if you enrolled in a different waiver program, you would have to terminate from the previous one that you were enrolled in. But I do agree that that can be something we can make a little bit more clear.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. So Tiffany, is there a comment from the chat you want to go to this point?
Yeah, I will. Kyle had a couple of comments, so I will just read his and we can go from there. So he asked, will there be exceptions to discontinuing people if they do not receive a service within a month if provider shortages are present? Also in one section, it says people have to receive a service in each month. In others, it says those who have received no HCBS waiver services for 1 month will be disenrolled. Should the verbiage match for purposes of clarity? Yes, we will take that back. And then his last comment was, will the rules place more emphasis on explaining that people must access natural supports and other community resources prior to accessing waiver services? I think you're referencing the concept of the payer of last resort. And I believe that is in here, but we'll make sure to log that question and get that reference for you.
Tiffany, I'm sorry to interrupt. Kyle, we have moved away from those definitions as natural, as giving priority to natural supports. We have insisted to HCBS that they don't use that too much.
Jose, you need to stop. I appreciate the value of what you're saying, but we have 150 people in the webinar, and we just can't do this. If you want to make a comment, you can raise your hand like everyone else. Okay. Tiffany, was that it? Or we?
That's all
okay.
for now.
So looks like Carol Meredith, you're up next, and then we'll go back to the chat.
Thank you. I have 2 questions regarding when you go to the hospital, you can't have HCBS. And maybe I'm crazy. I've been trying to look this up forever and I keep forgetting to do it. But I thought we changed that for people with severe cognitive disabilities, communication disorders, and neurodiversity, that a DSP could go in and provide services in a hospital because the hospital staff doesn't know what they're doing. Am I nuts about that?
I don't know
not change.
I don't know anything about that, but we can ask the program staff that question and look at our waiver applications and get back to you.
Thank you. And then my next question was around the waiting list, which I can't see anymore.
Can scroll up a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah, the waiver showed me the data on eligibility for services was initially determined. Does that include the age 14 rule for HCBS DD, where you can get on the waiting list at age 14, even though you're not eligible for that waiver? I don't see it anywhere there, and it's something we work with individuals and families on all the time to get on that wait list at age 14. Make sure you're on it, get a letter, whatever.
Sure.
Where is that?
That's a great question. I believe it should be in the targeting criteria and eligibility for the individual waivers. But we will make sure that there's clarity on that in this section.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Carol. Tiffany, anything from the chat you want to cover at this moment?
We have quite a few comments here. So I'm going to try to get through a few of them, if that's okay. Julie Miller, sorry, Julie. Again, number 4 would suggest 30 days versus 1 month for consistency. Thank you for the call out. We will go back to that. And then Amanda S asked, will correctional facilities be included in D for institutional status? And I'm assuming that is, you're saying letter D. Under institutional status, got it. Asking about correctional facilities for institutional status. Okay. We will take that back to the program staff and the SMEs and get that question for you. Thanks, Amanda. And then the last one, I think a couple people pointed out, there's a typo. I think it's a typo. Sarah, you can kick me if it's not. ICD/IDD, I think should be ICF/IID.
It should be ICF/IID.
Great. Yep, we'll fix that typo. Thanks for catching that. I will pause on the chat and go back to John.
Thanks, Tiffany. I think we can lower Carol's hand now. Charlene, you're up next.
Yes, I had a question. I saw that there was something about if service going to a waiting list, if services could be provided at a lower cost to Medicaid. That sounds like a whole process to me. How that would be determined, who determines it, and so forth. Is there an explanation of that anywhere?
Great question, Charlene. I think this will be covered in, this will be covered in the cost effectiveness and over cost containment group. Would you like to be added to that list of stakeholders?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think that's a huge issue.
Great.
So yes, please.
Thanks, Charlene.
Okay, thanks. Pat Chamberlain, we'll stick with the audio for a minute. Pat?
Hi, everybody. I have two questions, and forgive me, I think it's been covered fairly well. The one is under termination H2. And my concern is, first of all, the wording under there is not even discernible. It's this cost of services and supports provided in the community exceed the cost effectiveness exceeds costs. I mean, that's a mouthful, but my major concern with that is, of course, we have people on waivers that receive care in their own homes, which is cemented by the final settings rule. They should have the ability to receive care in their homes and in the community, regardless of cost. And I know that other people have raised that issue. So first of all, wording in that, and second of all, premise. And then the other question I had was higher in the queue, where I think Charlene just referred to. I had the same issue about waiting lists. And I am thinking of people on SLS. Do they forever stay on SLS if their needs are being met? I mean, how do they go to, for instance, the DD waiver, if their needs are being met now and something happens? Let's say, they have a death of a parent, or circumstances change. How do they get off of that if their needs are being currently met? Regardless, it doesn't say anything about a life-changing event or anything.
Great questions, Pat. I think your first question will be addressed in that over cost containment work group. And then the second, I know that there's an emergency enrollment process that we have. I believe that it's currently in case management rules, but we will talk with the team about making a reference to that in this section at minimum, if not putting that emergency enrollment here and referencing into case management.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you, Pat. This is John. Tiffany, let me do a time check with you. We are at 10:45, and for the agenda, we're moving to a wrap up, if you wish.
We are. I see there are more than several comments in the chat that we did not get to. So we will be documenting all of these questions. I do want to do a last call for any hands to be raised to verbalize your questions. It looks like we will be meeting again in 2 weeks to talk through all of the rules that are program specific to each waiver. So we will be coming back to these rules, not these specific ones. So.
Thanks, Tiffany. So this is John. We have one hand raised. Anyone else? We're doing one more round of verbal comments. Okay. Jose, please go ahead. Thanks.
Just as a housekeeping item, I am saving the transcript. However, it will be really helpful if you guys could send that together with or post that together with the recording, since a lot of us would like to keep notes of these meetings. Thank you.
You're asking for the transcript to be posted with the, okay.
Thank you, Jose. Pat Chamberlain?
I just want an overall question. We have a lot of questions that seem to be going to whatever we're calling it now, not the parking lot. How do we know the answers to these questions, and how do we prevent going back over them and over them and over again? We just need to see what's being done about the questions.
Yeah, great question, Pat. Actually, Nicola, if you want to stop sharing your screen, and Steve, if you want to pull up what we have gone over today.
Sure. And I need the host is disabled the participant sharing, so that needs to be.
Well.
And you guys can also pull it up from your side too, because it's been on the shared document.
Are you able to share now, Steve?
Yes. Okay, so most of the things have been coming up on the listening log. So I've been cleaning this up as we've been going along. And I will spend more time cleaning it up because you guys have been throwing a lot of different things within it. And I've been capturing things within the chat and the different different components within that. You can see that some of the things that were on the earlier meetings, that they have been accepted, and that there have been rationale and responses from the last meetings that have been accepted within there. And I will be cleaning up the rest of this. You guys can view this and provide me anything that I might have gotten wrong or misrepresented within it, or things that you didn't think to speak at the meeting and want to have added, and I can add that to the document.
So again, that is posted online and is updated live as we are making changes. We are going in there and updating those comments and where they're at in the process. Charlene, I see your question about what happened to the questions. The questions should be in there too. Any other hands to be raised that you'd like to come off mute? Okay.
Like we have one, Charlene again. Charlene Willie, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to know, when you put a question in there, how do you answer it? Many of these questions are pretty in-depth. And I don't, making a comment and having it accepted is pretty clear, but how do you answer questions?
So questions are being answered by subject matter experts who are, pulling together work groups. They are, they've been working with stakeholders. They're kind of the policy people behind all of this. And so they provide updates on where they're at in in that process of making that change or accepting or denying or modifying that suggestion or that question. And then we put that in that document for you all to see.
Okay, and those documents is that posted online? Like after this meeting, will that then be updated, posted online in its most current form and then continually updated?
It's posted right now and it updates live. So everything, you'll see the updates that Steve have been making in this meeting. They are up there right now.
Okay, so if these are subject matter experts, why aren't they answering them directly? Why do we have a process that goes through a third party? I'm still confused.
So because we have so many rules to get through, this is the process that we are needing to go through to get through all of the rules. There will still be an MSB public comment period. This doesn't supersede that. This is just work on the front end to kind of get comments and feedback and input in writing the rules before they are presented to MSB and before we go through that public comment period. So we have divided the next 6 months into 3 sections. The first is this waiver eligibility. The next will be case management. And then the final group is benefits and provider requirements. And again, just to be able to get through all of the rules, that's why we can't address every question every single time.
Right, I am just trying to figure out how the final answers are published. So in other words, if the question is taken, if it is answered, if that answer is put into this spreadsheet, and that's it, correct? Is that that's the end of the discussion?
So unless someone wants to bring that up again or request a separate meeting outside of these meetings for further discussion, which that's the second piece of the issues for further discussion, where we are taking those back, creating smaller groups like we've talked about with the level of care, the CIS, and the over cost containment and cost effectiveness.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Hey, on the cost containment meeting, I had heard from a number of stakeholders. So the people that I have on the list so far from the chat and everything is Charlene, that you're there, Jose there, Elsa, Luke, Pat, Patricia. Anybody else that wants to be added on that? Actually, if you just add your name into chat in the chat right now, I will add you to the list.
Thank you, Steve. Tiffany, there is one more hand. Do we have time for it, or do you need to move forward?
I think we can do one more hand.
Okay, Jose, please go ahead. Thank you.
I just want to enter into the record that it's kind of troubling that we are not adding specific meanings within the main stream of meanings, if you will, to answer those questions to Charlene's point, because like she said, many of these questions are questions about the changes that you're making, are questions in depth about stuff that we are looking at the rules, even if you didn't change them right now, but they're there, and they should be answered, because I think that one of the possibilities once we go to the MSB is that, and I'm going to be blunt about it, and Steve, please, you know me, we will have to be disruptive of the MSB if we don't have answers that are satisfactory to those questions. And yes, I get that we are going to create work groups for different subject matters. I get it, and maybe that's the answer, and that's fine. But since in the main flow of these meetings, I mean, right now we have 131, but at one point we had 151 attendance. A lot of them deserve an answer. And we are people who are very constantly involved in LTSS, in Medicaid, in HCBS, in all the areas that Medicaid serves, and the CMRD, including CCDC, who has a contract with HCBS to do this job. So I think our input, our questions deserve to be answered in a more open manner instead of just creating subgroups, which I get why. I'm not saying no, I'm just saying these answers should be provided to the larger group, in my view.
I think too, can I speak to that?
Yeah, go for it.
So when you're going through and you know that you've had questions and you've put them into the logs and that we've put them in the logs, and then you can see what our outcomes were, what our notes were, what our answers were to those. I think what we're saying is if those answers were not satisfactory, if you feel like they weren't answered the way that you feel like we just didn't answer your particular question, then I think we're very open to you bringing those back. We're doing it this way just to be kind of quick so that everybody has a chance to get their point of view across. There's so many people, so we would never get through these rules if we were to be able to stop and get the right person to come in and answer every question on the spot. It just wouldn't be possible. So what we do is we take these back, we find out who is the best subject matter expert to answer them. And I've been doing it very quickly to make sure before even the next meeting that anything that's been asked in the prior meeting is already responded to. So I definitely would, I would always appreciate if you feel like the answers that we have come up with are not great. And then we are going to have like wrap ups to everything and to these sections. And that could be a good time that if you're seeing in the log, like, oh, I asked this question, here it is, number 7 on there. This was your response. Can you elaborate? Or I don't think that you understood my question. I think that would be a great way to do that. What do you think, Tiffany?
I think that's great. I also put our email addresses in the chat. If you have more comments that you were not able to make in the time frame of our meeting today, you're welcome to email us those. And we will plan to see you all back in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
If you can keep it open for just a couple minutes, I want to make sure that I capture the last ones.
No problem. Thanks, Steve.